Welcome to the Bonsai Time Podcast, the monthly Everything Bonsai and More podcast. In today's episode, we will discuss our personal takeaways from our time working with Dan Robinson on bonsai trees. Have a listen and enjoy.
Today we're with us again, your host, Kevin Ryan. And I don't know if you all know, but Ryan just spent a good week, 8 days or so in Seattle, Washington with his teacher, Dan Robinson, over the new year into this last weekend. You got back on the 8th, is that right?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Overall,
before school started, yeah.
Yeah.
Good winter break.
Overall, how was it?
It was great. Very rewarding way to spend a vacation. I've never done like a bonsai vacation where, honestly...
Explicitly bonsai.
Yeah. That was the main reason that I went there. But then, of course, I have friends and family there, too, that I saw while I was there. But pretty much every weekday while I was in Seattle, I was taking the ferry. Dan picked me up, and then we would go work on trees. And then when you came, I stayed with Dan, or we both stayed with Dan and worked on more trees. So good learning experience. And I feel like now that I'm in Ohio, away from my teacher, I have to put in a little more effort to get that kind of a learning experience.
Right. The energy is
that I used to take for granted.
Yeah. No, there is the energy, when you're with someone who can do it full time, 24/7, bonsai brain all the time. And it really reflects on their practice because you see their trees and how much they've, worked at putting things together. Mm-hmm. On a side note, if you hear some clipping noises, it's Ryan working on his Trident maple.
The one that I should have pruned months ago. But sometimes it's like that.
When we're podcasting, we're still working. I'm interested in the know because as the introduction that we have for our podcast, you talked about touched on your time with Dan and how you came about to meet him and be a part of the Dan School of Bonsai, if you will, the Elandan garden idea. What was different this time than your previous times with him before he moved out here?
Well, before, when I was working with him just kind of while living in the area, most of the time I would say I would go out there and then I would say, okay, Dan, what do you need help with today? So this time was a little bit like that, where some of the trees and some of the things that he needed help with, we did those. But I had more of a defined view of what I wanted to get better at while I was there. And I would say that the things that I told Dan I wanted to work on were generally like primary wiring and the carving. Right. So those are things that I've been practicing more since I left, but hadn't done as much while I was there working under him. I had been, de-wiring a lot of his trees and maybe helping here and there, but I hadn't done like a full tree.
Gotcha.
Except for on my own private trees. So I told him that, and we picked out one of his field-grown black pines that he had grown for some 23 years or so. And a lot of that time was in the ground. So this tree just had some big stubs that were sacrifice branches. That would be the deadwood that I carved. And then it also had some very long branches, and so some decisions had to be made about what would go, what would you make the tree out of down below. And the tree hadn't really been wired before. It just maybe some branches had been bent here and there to help with creating a foundation that later you could decide what to do with. So I pretty much did the whole first carving on. Luckily, I had 3 large gins, so I got 3 shots at it, and I definitely felt over the course of those 3, I got a lot better. And my third one, I don't know if Dan will agree with this characterization, but the third gin that I carved is where it really clicked, and I feel like I could make deadwood more similar to the way that Dan does it in his garden.
Right. Yeah. Right. As that, I think, is a good approach to acquire the knowledge, try to, I don't want to say replicate, but almost mime or mimic what Dan would do, and then be able to attain that information and go from there. Is that?
Yeah, but also I was styling the tree from the perspective that this tree was going to be in Dan's collection. So I did want to make it along the lines of a Dan Robinson tree so that it wouldn't stick out like a sore thumb in his garden.
Right, in the style of Dan.
In the style of Dan, mimicking
And
ultimately an ancient, old growth tree, as he loves to opine about, if
right,
you will.
right. And, he has pined over those trees, no pun intended,
Yeah.
For so long, meaning he has like heartbreakingly gone up into these mountains and done the work, but also just taking notice of the natural form of trees and old growth to what he calls gnarly, as you all have probably by now listened to on his podcast that we have been graciously been able to have the time with him to record that, and what he calls them gnarly and what about gnarly is to him. And I've noticed that since I met you, in Columbus when you drove here and helped you get all the pumice out and everything out of your trailer for all your trees.
Yeah.
Within that, when we would get together and do like a little bit of styling work, or I'd help you build some boxes for your trees or whatever, what have you, you would have this different opinion on trees than I ever thought about, which has been amazing. Before you met Dan, how was your perception of trees? I mean, you grew up in Columbus, so the idea of trees is deciduously based.
Deciduous. There are some pine trees here that
Eastern white pine and pitch
Austrian
pine,
black pine too, planted by the cities and all that. But I would say some of my like early influence in observing trees is, as a kid, I loved to climb trees.
Right.
My grandparents lived on a farm, and they had this beautiful magnolia clump. It was perfect for climbing because all the branches are low and everything. So I was kind of intimately involved in the inside working of trees at that time, because you got to be like, okay, where's the next branch? Where can I grab onto or fall off of, as the case may be?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, that was just as a little kid. So I think that kind of internalized some, and then definitely being out west and being in all of these wild spaces. My friends and I love to camp out there.
Olympic National Forest, all
and
these...
go hike up to the tree line. You find all these gnarly, battered trees, and so part of it is you can observe the trees around you. And here in Ohio, we have a lot of young trees, especially.
Right.
But a big influence for me was, especially after I started talking to Dan, but maybe even before that, I was also observing the great old trees in the western forests, and everything just started to make a lot more sense once I was talking to Dan about it, and he's observed even more than I have over his life. And
so he's 82 now?
Yep.
And he's been doing bonsai since 1953?
Yep. And I think some of the natural things that Dan has observed about ancient trees, he's been observing those things since he was a kid as well.
Right.
Because they were all around him his whole life.
Historically for him, yeah.
But for me, it was more like trying to bring my biology background to explain his observations. So I tried to, when I have a tree that I'm styling, I try to be able to explain why I'm styling it that way. That's kind of my perspective. That's how I'm choosing to do it right now, is I want to think about the natural forces while I'm doing the styling.
Right.
So, yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I believe so. We're just doing more of a reflection.
Yeah.
Because you spent your, time and hard-earned money to get out there to go study with your teacher on a more focus-based consideration, as what you said before. You worked there, you quasi-apprenticeshiped with him in the form of, gaining knowledge, but this time was so set forth, it was like a class, or a full-time, literally full-time job, as you would be if, not to discredit people in Japan. They're doing way more than what we have.
Just a week.
But with the intention of having the respect for the craft and art.
And I think if anyone out there is trying to get better at bonsai, one of the best ways to do it is to find someone like that in your area who's very experienced with bonsai, and just ask them, hey, can I help out around the garden? Like Dan is very gracious with his time in his collection in that way, and that he's generally very accepting to students. To student volunteers, I should say. But I'm sure there's a lot of other people out there who have a lot of trees that might be willing to teach people.
Look at your local clubs and things, with your overall, why now? Why did you choose to now, this new year, go into the idea when you told me, I'm going to go to Dan's place for like a week. I was like, wow, that's cool.
You know, honestly,
what about it? What made that change?
Honestly, I don't remember exactly. I had been, I think, following different bonsai people on social media, and I almost felt like my skills were slipping or not growing as fast as I wanted them to be compared to some of the other apprentices out there. So I was like, okay, I have to really put in the effort and make the trip back to see Dan in order to elevate my own skills. You know? And there are opportunities to learn here in Ohio, and those are all great as well. But for me, like going back to the original source and observing or trying to soak up more of his knowledge, now that I have had the added perspective of leaving and seeing trees in a different place, it had a little more urgency, you could say.
How old were you when you moved out of Ohio?
I was 18 when I moved to Ohio.
Or to Seattle?
Yeah, when I moved to Seattle.
Okay.
Yep, and then probably like 24 when I moved back here.
Yeah, because that's a whole different growth of perspective, if you could say that. And the idea of your life changed, you know, from the quiet Midwestern embodiment, you know, very quiet but honest and nice, to the Midwest where it's, or the Pacific Northwest where it's really laid back, hippies, trees, and you know, all kinds of trees. And you know, Dan as a person is very outspoken now.
Oh yeah.
And which is a good thing because he doesn't sugarcoat. He just, you know, he's very honest.
Just provides the feedback.
Within that feedback, how do you think that helped you with permitted information given to you? How did that help you going forward? Like, if you could expand on that.
Well, I think I guess one way we can talk about it is, for example, in this tree that I was styling. Originally there was a very long branch with some foliage at the top, and it had this big straight section. And originally I was going to try to keep that section and do some creative carving to make the straight section like look less, less obvious, less obtrusive to the eyes, if that's the right description.
Right.
But Dan kind of knew from the very beginning that he thought that branch should go. So my initial... And he was not shy about telling me that, but I was going to try to do it my way first, and then, you know, you can always take more off later. So I was thinking I'll try to carve the top and down the side, and then later on, the gin at the top actually broke. So then I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm doing it Dan's way now.
Right. Meant to be.
It's worth taking the time to try it your own way. Before you try like the way that someone's telling you to do something, just because I got to practice extra carving on that top gin that broke off. Right. So that was another part of the learning process. And then if something doesn't work out, you make adjustments and you kind of roll with the punches. It's
an interesting perspective, being that, you know, Kumi, my wife, is from Japan. We'd have discussions about education and learning with said education and who you learn from. As in Japan, you would just do as your teacher and or as it's known, sensei over there says to do. You don't have your own time. But out here in this facilitation of our own individuality, we still have that ability to approach it. And Dan is a very free-flowing person in that way where if you want to try something, go for it. But ultimately... it'll generally be Dan's way.
Yeah. You know, he is very well informed into why he sees that it should be a certain way. Yeah. But he's a good guy to learn under because he's open to that kind of experimentation.
So just as you said that, you know, jumping off that, do you think with that well-informed intention Dan has and knowledge that he has gained over the last 60 plus years, do you think he knew it, but ultimately you wanted to find out for yourself of why? Is that what you're saying? As far as like your interpretation of it was like, this reason I want to try this, see if it'll work, but Dan knew possibly it wouldn't work in that way? Or
I think he just thought it would be better his way, which is probably right in the end. It turned out pretty well in the end, but it's especially in that kind of context where you can always just cut it off later and then adjust. There's really nothing to lose other than time and effort. And in terms of practice, that's not something that's lost. That's something that's gained. So
right, no, it's true, because every time you're learning something, you're gaining new knowledge.
But yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
With your time at Dan's, you did carving and wiring. Mm-hmm. What else did you gain? Besides just the physical aspect of producing the craft within the art. Mm-hmm. What knowledge did you gain from the scenery this time? I mean, you've been away for 2 years now. Mm-hmm. Full time. COVID still is a thing.
Yeah.
Quarantining as much as we can, whether it be our own thing with our partners or otherwise. Mm-hmm. We're not going out. You and I both have gone out to go Yamadori digging, at your aunt and uncle's place, mm-hmm. a friend of ours place in private land that we know of. As you know, it's so hard to get a permit from Ohio. Mm-hmm. Forestry and whatnot. How is your perception different of, natural nature now?
Well, I think I've definitely realized, like a lot of Dan's guidance on what an ancient tree looks like is very maybe conifer specific.
Yes.
Conifer is very apically dominant. They have that very strong central leader. And the whole time that I was out there, you could go hiking in the Olympics and you'll see, especially in boggy areas or, even in areas that haven't been logged, you'll see some trees where they have a top central leader and the leader died, and then you have another branch at the bottom or lower down that tries to go up and be the next top.
Right.
So that's a very conifer specific pattern.
Right.
But this is a very big part of what guides Dan's styling of ancient trees or bonsai that look ancient.
Yeah.
Because that is a pattern that repeats itself throughout a lot of conifers. And in his book, he has examples of that.
Right.
And even just across from his garden, he has examples that he shows everyone that comes to the garden.
360 view. Yeah.
Yeah. But here, especially since I moved here, we have many more deciduous trees.
Yes, older growth.
And the conifers that we do have aren't old enough to show that kind of a pattern, I would say.
But nor do we have the environment that they would grow in that way either, because pines generally don't grow in a conical form in the sense of like a Douglas fir or anything that would be out there.
Yeah.
Given the climate. So with your interpretation of deciduous, how are you going to approach that now from having the carving and aspects of Dan? Because there are some gnarly old deciduous trees here.
There are some gnarly old deciduous trees.
A lot of deadwood, a lot of snags, but just a different. It's not conical. It's almost like a dome.
Yeah.
I don't want to say dome it's not a flat. This is what it is, but
I think form. Dan also recognizes that difference. Like he doesn't necessarily treat deadwood the same on the conifer versus the deciduous. One thing that is a marker of an ancient tree on a deciduous tree would be the presence of that deadwood. And especially deciduous trees are much more likely to have a big hollow because their wood is much softer. Once they do have a scar, it's much more likely to rot away.
The pity wood, right?
Yep. And so Dan has a lot of examples of that in his garden. But I guess when I was there originally, when I was working there and living in Seattle, I didn't have as many examples of deciduous trees to look to, that were full size anyways.
Yeah.
Whereas here, I'm starting to look more closely at the branch structures of all these deciduous trees around. So starting to realize, like, they generally, like, even if they have multiple branches going up, they'll try to grow up first, and then the secondary branches might tend to go down to fill the remaining space. Whereas the pines, they might have primary branches going down to fill that space.
And then they go up.
Yeah.
And that is how a tree generally grows. I mean, if you're watching on YouTube, look at here. All these want to grow up. And then they'll start pushing out and go down. Looking at how trees form and how they grow, that's understandable.
Yeah.
With the knowledge you gained, how will you interpret it or even give it to people out here that are not ever known of Dan or know of Dan but have a outlook on Dan that isn't different from yours?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I'm trying to bring home to my own trees is how common and how natural deadwood is. Like, even a young tree, you can very easily find dead branches on it.
Yeah.
And there's this whole range of deadwood from big to small, new to old deadwood, with the hollows being the oldest deadwood, and a bare branch being the newest.
Right.
But so I'd say trying to incorporate more aspects of deadwood into my trees, and trying to bring that naturalistic styling informed by Dan would be the main ways that I'm trying to bring it into my own art here, that I try to share with the club at the club shows and whatnot. So that's my general impression of maybe the most important lessons from Dan is natural trees. You have to look at the trees in nature very closely in order to know what, if you want your tree to look natural as opposed to being a topiary bush, what are the lessons that you can learn from the natural trees around you. And wherever you are, you will have different trees to look to, but you can find examples and you can copy or start to make a visual memory bank in your brain, and then that can start to inform your styling of your trees.
Right.
That's probably the biggest overarching lesson, like Dan Robinson lesson you can apply anywhere in the world.
Right.
And then, he loves deadwood. That's the second thing.
Yeah.
And then he loves gnarly branches because his logic is once the tree is old, it's kind of struggling to grow. It's growing much more slowly, so these branches come out like they're trying to grow up, and then they grow down because whatever environment they're in. It might not even be that the environment is that difficult. It could be in some cases, but in other cases, the tree is just so old and, it's kind of almost weakening in energy that's trying to grow up, but ends up growing down or in crazy shapes. So I think those might be some of the first lessons that, like if we were to say briefly, look at natural trees, look at natural deadwood, and then put some deadwood in your bonsai trees if you want it to look like an old tree.
Right.
And then...
But you're not saying, if it's a pencil-sized tree, put deadwood on it. What basis are we saying as far as what Dan would say, or what Dan has told you as far as what age is appropriate for adding significant deadwood? Well,
one thing that anyone can do is if you're going to cut off a branch, you don't have to leave a flat cut.
Right.
You can carve that cut like I did on the pine tree. And I'll include a picture of that in the show notes so people can kind of see some examples. But even if you cut off a small branch, you don't have to leave a flat cut there either. And those small cuts will heal quickly, so you have that option. But you can choose to scrape the bark off of that small branch, leave a small natural gin or something like that. So, that's kind of what I would think about. And those small gins are probably more common on the conifers. And even in nature, those fall off over time. So it's like not a big deal if those fall off. But you just have these little options to incorporate pieces of deadwood and add to the natural story of your tree. So if you're looking for those options, you can find them and use them. But if you want a very perfect tree that has no scars, it may not be a totally natural tree. And that's, it could be, but every tree in nature eventually experiences some trouble.
Right.
Or, humans
climactic
come and cut
impact,
it down. That might be
all
that
kinds
might
of
be a more all-encompassing challenge.
So with, your time spent before when you met Dan, just by basically looking through the, the phone book, if you will, quote unquote phone book of Google.
Something like that.
And then to now, being that you're in a PhD as opposed to when you were out there doing your bachelor's and whatnot. How do you feel you've changed in yourself just with the education you've got within the, I don't want to say stagnant education of a university, but it's not a Dan education of let's eat cowboy cookies and Snickers. So, with that, like, how does that in part reflect on you? Like, how have you changed as a person? 1 week can change a person, 4 years can change a person. Do you see yourself from the time you spent with him when you were there to now outside of the trees, but in yourself personally? What have you thought about different now as far as yourself and application to your future, to anything? Is there anything in that way that came about?
Well, I will say in terms of teaching style, Dan is a very hands-on teacher. Like, there's some stories about people that go to Japan and do an apprenticeship and then they're just watering for a long time and like doing these chores that aren't really styling trees and all that.
Right.
So that's one way of teaching, is like working your way up very gradually. But Dan is more like throw you in the lion's den, like here, have a pruners, go prune that giant landscape maple or something like that. So that was basically my first experience teaching with or learning from Dan. Is very hands-on experience.
Years ago, right?
Yep, years ago, 2016.
Okay, yeah, good time.
Yep, and the university, we take all these classes, we have to study, then we take a test, and then you may never use that information.
Right.
But even in the lab, you can prepare so much, you can read so much, but eventually you have to put down your laptop, put down, whatever textbook and go do the thing if you're trying to make an experiment.
An application, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of in my day job almost. You can prepare as much as you want, but you might learn faster by actually going and do the thing,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So that could be like a general life lesson.
Okay.
You could say.
So that's solidified more of a work as well as read aspect.
Yeah, yeah. And in my own, when I'm teaching, I far prefer to have hands-on elements, kind of where possible, or at least interactive elements, so that the students can learn better.
Do you find the more time you spend with Dan, the more you trust yourself in like your opinion on what you know and what you can apply?
Yeah, in terms of bonsai, I definitely did gain a lot of confidence by working with Dan and seeing Dan's trees and all that. For example, when I first started working with Dan, I was so nervous, anxious to even touch one of his centuries-old trees. And then now it's like, oh, no big deal. I'll just go prune this here, take off the wire here. Like, I know exactly what all these trees need.
And when you say century-old, for the listeners and viewers, how old are we talking about?
Well, he's got a lot of trees that are multiple centuries old, and he also has the famous Methuselah, he calls it, which he has estimated the date of origin back to 300 BC.
Right.
And so that would be just over 2,000 years old.
Right.
And out of those 2,000 years, he's directly counted 900 years of age on one of these branches that he cut off for his styling of it. So direct count of 900 years, and then he's estimated the age overall using the radius of the trunk. Right. He has a background in forestry.
Right.
And so he's got a lot of tree connections, you could say.
Yeah,
and he's very good at interpreting like the natural history of these trees, and before he even found them, based on the environment that they were in and the scars, and like, oh, this one has a broken branch here, and like all these different things. So, yeah.
With the knowledge that you just gained, within this week, and I would think that you go out more often than not when you have time, right? Next
if I
break,
can,
for another week or something, or 4 or 5 days as opposed to a full 8 days, with a lot of time given school and work and partner. Do you feel like you would consider Dan's work to bring a new idea and approach that more people should learn? Or should be gifted?
It's all a matter of preference. His preference is trees that look very ancient
and gnarly,
and he'll tell you as much in the interview that we recorded with him.
Yeah.
And other people prefer, like, even people that like big deadwood on junipers, they'll have this great healthy helmet of foliage.
Right, Darth Vader. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't mean that in a derogatory way, because those trees are also beautiful.
Yeah.
But
this is quoting Dan.
It's just different. Different styling preferences. Right. And so Dan's preference, like, along with all the natural deadwood, or imposed deadwood that he made to look natural,
right?
He prefers sparse trees where you can really see the branch structure, and it's kind of interesting because even the people in Japan, they have a big pine or a big hinoki cypress. They'll have to sparse it out every now and then, anyways, to let the inner foliage not get shaded out. But I would say the people in Japan who prefer that style, they're more likely to show the tree when it's very full.
Right.
Whereas Dan is more likely to show the tree shortly after he's sparsed it out and you can see all the branch structure.
Right.
Or
natural versus cultural impact, right?
Yeah. And it takes a lot of skill to get a tree that full and have everything on the inside not be shaded out and everything.
Exactly.
And a lot of very elegant branch placements. But again, Dan's whole thing is not like straight lines. He wants gnarly branches, and that's what keeps his attention and keeps him motivated. So if people want to learn how to do that, or it starts with finding old trees like we already discussed, but you can look at examples of Dan's trees online and on my blog, and you can kind of see for yourself which style you prefer.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And you can try it on one of your trees, and if you don't like it, you can always change the style of your tree later.
Yeah, it's true. It just take a couple of years, or 5.
Yeah. But I come at it from the perspective of a scientist, so I'm kind of open to having some trees that I try to style a certain way, and then other trees that I try to style in the Dan way, and then you can see which one you like more after a few years.
Right. Mm-hmm. With Dan's consideration for his layout of his nursery, in the idea that the land was used as a dump that was burned from the military or what have you, city owned. Either way, it was a dump, a centralized location to burn garbage, which he had.
Back in the 40s, I think he said.
I believe so, 40s or 50s. Yeah. A question is, with Dan's garden, his nursery layout, does that impact you for your future design of a garden in mind? As I'm assuming you'd want to have a house someday, maybe with a simple piece of land, something that grants access to a bigger plot of land that you can do a bonsai nursery with, maybe a small hoop house growing or something. Yeah. All the above plus your job. How did that influence you? From now, seeing it in that way where you're older. You've been away from it for 2 years completely. Yeah. In the reflection of what you saw, you were so nervous in the beginning. How does that influence your future and dynamic of your own nursery?
Well,
or the idea of your own garden?
Yeah. I would say, even in terms of gardening, like Dan has a pretty unique style. Yeah. Dan enters in this flower and garden show in Seattle every year. It's the second biggest flower and garden show in the country. And so it's at the Washington State Convention Center in downtown Seattle. And they probably have like 10 or 15 landscaping companies come to the convention center and build a whole artificial garden inside of the convention center. And so every year, Dan brings in these, or it's kind of a combination. They use sawdust to mound up the terrain, you could say, and then mulch on top of that. And then the convention center, whoever throws this flower and garden show, they bring in big rocks that people can use. And a lot of these landscapers, like, they'll build structures. Like, they'll build, like, you can put a pool here, a grill here, a little shade structure here. It seems like the years that I've been there, which are maybe like 4 years at least, Dan has never had a structure. He's always been about the rocks, and then he'll bring giant landscape trees from his garden, and then he'll bring some bonsai trees, and he'll bring he usually also has, what am I thinking of? They do have some stone sculptures.
From his son, right?
Yep, from his son. But
amazing sculptures.
Yes, and he'll bring a lot of deadwood. That's the thing that I was trying to think of.
Okay, coastal deadwood.
Of course, Dan Robinson brings deadwood.
Right.
So he, in his making of gardens, makes them as natural as he can. Like, so he has all of these features that you would find out in a wild place, and not as much man-made influence. So I think that part definitely has influenced me a lot. Like, if I am able to get a house someday, hopefully, then I would definitely try to lean more towards that style. I don't know that you're going to get big rocks out here in Ohio, as you can easily there in Washington.
There's plenty out here.
Okay.
West Virginia.
But yeah, I definitely lean more towards, like, having my house be, or my future garden be, as natural as possible. Working with natural species, things that are normally around, and trying to, have it be a peaceful place. But yeah.
Would you want something like on a lake, ideally, or?
I'm open to it. I'm open to all options at this point.
Right.
Right now, I'm in an apartment attic next to the university, so anything is a possibility.
Yeah, stepping stones.
Yep.
Awesome. So as far as the ongoing conversation with Dan and what you learned from your week of servitude, any design aspects that you picked up from him, as outside of the carving, more wiring, or anything in that way?
Definitely, for the purpose of making the gnarly branches that Dan likes, I noticed, and he showed me directly, that how wrapping more wire around a branch or using tighter bends of the wire can let you get a more compact bend in the branch while supporting the branch so it doesn't break. So for dance style, that's great, and definitely a useful thing to pay attention to if you want a branch to have a very sudden bend or a very severe that's a useful strategy. And that I picked up, I'd say. And that's the one that I remember today while I was wiring my vine maples. So a lot of the things that you kind of pick up from learning under a bonsai teacher are almost subconscious, and then you remember it after the fact when you're doing the styling.
In application. Yeah. Yeah, that's really good information, actually. Thank you for sharing that.
And I did do another like advanced bending technique where, let's say I had a very thick branch that was straight, and straight's kind of boring if you're a Dan Robinson figure. So, or if you're trying to make gnarly trees that have a difficult history in terms of their natural history that you're showing.
Right.
So the other strategy that Dan showed me that I got to try was how he hollowed out the branch, stuffed it with wire, wrapped it with raffia, and then you can bend an otherwise large and straight branch into a more appealing shape.
Right.
Yeah. So those were some of the biggest things that I learned. And then, of course, there's some of the things that he told you that maybe are more generalizable. So what would you say that you picked up from your conversations with Dan and just walking around his garden during your time there, Kevin?
Oh, many conversations and stories he said. He's full of so many, stories of life. He's such a wordsmith too. He's definitely a walking dictionary in certain points of the conversation we were having with him. Just his capacity for collecting was huge. I mean, the trees he was coming out with on the mountain, off the mountain with, by himself. He told us a story where he gave up his shirt to control the root system of this. I think it was the Ponderosa or something. He brought down that 8-foot, 3-foot diameter tree by himself with the one viable root, and then he did his
the root enhancement.
The root enhancement, yeah. That was something else. He went into full detail with that, and that blew my mind. I wish I could recant everything he said about it, and I just think it comes with practice and proper trying and failing.
For the people listening at home, how would you explain his root enhancement technique to someone who might have some large Yamadori that they want to try to safely collect?
What I got from his root enhancement technique, and I want to hear your side of it too, as you study with him longer in time and length, is that what he told me is that he would go up to a tree, and if it was growing in a rock, it had very limited feeder roots, but very long, stronger roots. And he had said that he would go up and with like a plastic bag, I believe it was, and then some potting soil or something, and then put the roots inside the bag as he got it free, but he didn't take the whole tree with him. And then put the potting soil on the bottom of the bag, and then combine the roots with the potting soil, and then close it up. Come back a year later or so, next season.
Some of those trees, he was saying he would come back like within a couple of months.
That too. Seasonally. A bunch
of usable roots. And just take it right
and then
away.
He would do that, and he told me he had just come up with that on his own. As y'all heard in this podcast that we did with him, a lot of his stuff just that really spoke to me was just I learned it. There was nothing for me to go off of. There was not really any books that he chose to go off of. His history just with trees and the environment, and how he chooses to style his trees is very aggro, if we're going in the 90s vocabulary. It's aggro and gnarly, and it was just so awe-inspiring to see his, because I have my own landscape company. I do landscape design. I'm at school for horticulture, so seeing that aspect as well, what he made possible in his nursery as such a natural entity on this recomposed trash dump. He brought in 3,000 yards of dirt and charged him $1 a yard. I mean, that's insane, and the stonework he has, the stones he has, just the prolificness that he has attached to his name was almost otherworldly feeling, where it's like, wow, you thought you saw something before, and then you see something, just completely different. Like Chase Rosade, which we'll have him, on a podcast sometime sooner than later. I had talked to him before I went in, and I said, "Hey Chase, what's going on? I know you're in New Hope, PA, but I know you know Dan Robinson real well. You guys do collecting and whatnot." He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Anything you want me to tell him?" He's like, "Oh, just say hi." Like I said, and say I'll call him when I'm done BSing around. And I did, and then they proceeded Dan proceeded to tell me stories of him and Chase on the rock and on the mountain really, and sleeping on coffee bags, and just literally let me into his world so freely, which I learned more just with the conversations and knowledge he was just dropping on me seemed like every minute. When he took me out and pulled me, he's like, "Come here," pulled me aside and said, "Look at that tree and look at this one." I was like, wow, the snag is real. I have a new appreciation for the dead top snag of a tree, because I didn't realize in this prolific ability that he has to find that old idea of a tree, that it's like right in my face. I grew up in Oregon, outside Portland, and I grew up seeing those all the time. Camping on the coast. You just never really pay attention to it unless you don't see it, like we do out here.
Yeah.
And that's the thing we talked about earlier with yourself, is like the representation of climate, culture, and geography. It's very much a whole petri dish in the United States. Like when I came out here, was to come with my wife because she was doing her PhD, and I drove across the country, and I, like you did yourself, it just more appreciation. And then seeing Dan still going strong from 1953 or something
like that.
The guy put a Korean pine in a duffel bag from Korea and brought it home, and it's still trucking, hardcore, healthy.
Yeah.
The thing too that I really just appreciated from him was that I took to heart was just, I don't care what other people are doing, as far as if they're having a good time, that's great, but I'm not going to let it influence me in a negative way. They all have their own ideas, and that's great too. Yeah. Because that's what bonsai is about.
Yeah. Sharing of ideas is helpful sometimes, but you don't have to listen to other people's ideas, especially if your idea of how you want your tree to look is going to take multiple years to pay off.
Yeah.
Definitely, I think a lot of beginners will have to build some fortitude almost to get through those years and see their final vision.
Yeah.
Other people might have ideas that maybe you could have a finished tree faster, but if you're very passionate about one path for your tree, you got to build some thick skin, especially in the online world to
and that's the
share that and along the way and reach that final destination.
And that's the thing too, that he just was so far from the online realm, which was amazing to see, because our culture is such an online culture now. Specifically for bonsai. In our age range. I'm in my early 30s. You're in your mid 20s. It's I didn't grow up with it, but I grew up seeing the realization that this is here. As opposed to nowadays. People younger than you are, phone in hand with their baby, pretty much. And it was just really interesting, especially like I had to jump in the water in my underwear to go grab that log because it was floating in the sound away. And he's like, "What are we gonna do?" And it was 32 that day, and it was probably 28-degree water.
That's some Dan Robinson level commitment right there.
Oh, I came to work and I wanted to show that I was there, and out of him allowing me to come, out of not knowing who I was from 2 ways from Sunday, I wanted to show that I was there to commit.
Didn't we still had snow and ice on the ground around on that day too?
Yeah.
So it's colder than your usual day in Seattle.
Definitely like quasi polar plunge, maybe how the Scandinavians do. I don't know, but it was it's still, as it's been over a week now since we've been back. It's been the whole thing of trying to find what I actually learned and put it into words. It's still coming. Like it's going to take a while, like you said, in the application.
Yeah.
Until I start getting my hands on my trees again, come this early spring. Hopefully it comes earlier than later, especially our long winter we're supposed to have this year. It'll be fun to see what I can get my hands into with what I picked up from Dan and just yourself too, because now I see like where you've come from as your learning background, because like I know Lee Cheadle, Ryan Neal, all these other people I've gotten to either work with or help out in their gardens and nurseries and just pick up from that way. As we both realize, the quickest way to learn is by giving your time, and volunteering and just being committed to trees and, hey, what can I do? Keep them busy. But Dan is just a powerhouse. I mean, he's 82 lifting trees up that maybe some people our age wouldn't even lift up,
Yeah.
What was this whole thing? Lift up.
Gotta look up when you lift up.
With your legs too.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look up at the ceiling.
Whole mantra.
That's it. It works.
It says you never throw out your back if you do it that way.
Supposedly.
Yeah. So far, I mean, he's 80 something. I guess he's working pretty well.
He's still doing 100 some push-ups a day, or
yep.
Or maybe 80.
He used to say that he did 100 push-ups in the morning and 100 push-ups when he went to bed. Although today or last week when we were there, I heard him say 80. So I don't know if he let off the gas a little bit.
Okay.
Maybe he's slipping. I don't know.
Cowboy cookies and Snickers do something good for him too. I mean, he doesn't look 82.
Yeah.
He looks like he's in his 60s. But just to show how strong he is as a person. I don't know if you knew, but he had heart surgery.
Oh yeah, I was there when it happened.
You were? Okay. Yeah. And then
But the heart surgery was a few years ago.
It was okay. And I thought it was something like recent. But yeah, they were like, on Thursday and Friday he got the surgery, and Saturday he's out of the hospital. I was like, you had heart surgery too? Because I told him about mine, when I was 6, and it was just it was crazy. I was like, wow. But if it wasn't for him being so healthy, he might have not made it.
Yeah.
That's what they were saying. It's like, I mean, there's just so much to take into account of what he said, because it was just it was like a college course, honestly. It was like a professor.
A rushed version of it, or
like an online version, the master class. Yeah, I mean, is there anything else that you can think of that you've taken away just from this time, being so focused and in that servitude aspect of you were there for this commitment to do it, and you had more hands on this time,
I think just in general, like in the past year that I've been in Ohio, away from Dan and Elandan Gardens as my primary side of bonsai schooling, I've definitely taken had to think about having more fortitude in myself, like more confidence in myself. Definitely. In terms of my styling on my trees. And people here in Ohio, a lot of them might have different ideas of how to style trees, and that's okay. Or
don't like to wire.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that is it. I guess it takes time to build that confidence in yourself, but Dan is a great role model for me in that regard, because he's so steadfastly focused on what his mission is to make all of his trees gnarly and ancient looking as possible. Yeah. And he just never seems to get sidetracked off of that.
True. Yeah, and that's what was cool too, because I talked about some of my future plans and ideas. He's like, that's great, but just remember the trees. Like, oh, it's always about the trees. It's like, good. Yeah. That's what I want to hear.
I mean, that's what got you here in the first place. So.
Yeah, I would hope so. Like, plus a PhD.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of the same for me. In all of my bonsai educational goals and like work with the club, I still try to have that all be secondary to spending time working on the trees themselves, because that's why I got into the hobby in the first place. Right,
because in that theory too, like Dan said, if you're not working on your trees and you're just enjoying them, but you're not really doing much outside of really applying what you are supposed to know if you want to do this, and that's where I think, just like anything, like if you're skateboarding, you have to put in the hours. It's like the time on the rock, like Randy Knight or Dan, when Dan was like, I talked to a lot of people about collecting. Like I talked to him about landscaping too, because he does in Milwaukee,
Yeah.
And just even collecting, like the people he's had interaction with, Randy Knight, people in Colorado,
Larry Jackal,
all these
Mary
people.
Madison, I think he even said that he collected with John Naka.
He's got stories with him, and it was just the stories he has, as everyone knows or will know from our podcast, but also if they've heard of this infamous, person enigma, if you will, of a person, like get up to his garden, like get up there, help
Only
out
1 hour ferry ride from downtown Seattle.
Yeah. 1 hour drive from there.
It's a pretty ferry ride, it's kind of worth the trip.
Yeah, I've not done that yet. I would like to, but no, it was life-changing, honestly. And just having that experience with you now too, is to learn something. What you learned from him is nice. Is there any other things you can reflect on before we?
Well, I wanted to ask you, because you've been to Ryan Neal's garden, Lee Cheadle's garden, and Jim Doyle and Chase Rosade's garden, among others, probably.
Michael Hagedorn's,
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, I guess, what stood out I know Dan is, you could say he's known for doing things a different way. But I haven't seen as many of those other gardens as you have. So I was wondering what stood out to you based on your other experiences.
That's a really good question. And I want to think about my answer with that because of all the people I've seen that are, known professionals around the world, Michael Hagedorn, Ryan Neal, Bill Vavalis, Chase Rosade, other people I can't think of right now that I know have been to nurseries and gardens and stuff that have studied in Japan and or were professionals via Japan from learning in Japan, have an essence about them, which is an amazing essence because they picked up what they learned from there, which you can tell because it's kind of their, it's what they're known for. Everybody has their thing.
It gives them a lot of credibility. Because they concentrated for so many years.
And you can tell certain things like with their teachers. Like Ryan Neal has a huge nursery, but it's beautiful. I think he's over 900 trees now. And I've gotten to help out there, a few times, more than a few times here and there, and call him a friend, and being there is a different experience because when I'm there, I'm working like I was at Dan's. Also give my time and just seeing the trees there as natural, but in a different light than Dan's, because Dan's is gnarly, and Ryan's are gnarly too, but it's just different, and then with like Michael Hagedorn, he studied with Shinji Suzuki, so you get to see that. I don't want to say softness, it's not in a bad way, but there's this like tranquility in his pad formation and his styling and everything, and it's beautiful, and that transcends into his apprentices like Andrew Robson or Bobby Curtwright. Those people, I've not seen their nurseries, but I've seen their work, and they have beautiful work. Andrew Robson's yard is amazing. What he's doing with that deciduous stuff is great. You got like Jim Doyle, who's got his flair, and Chase with his, his foundational flair from being back in the 50s and 60s doing trees and whatnot. I think he's been doing this since '63.
He's been doing probably almost as much as, or as long as Dan has.
But the thing with Dan that stuck out was like, when I asked him, like, how did you get into this, or did you study? He's like, I didn't study with anybody. I found a group of older guys, the Bonsai Bums, they called them, I think.
Yep. The Seattle originals.
Just the idea of how he formulated these ideas on how he wanted his trees to look were out of his own brain, and what he saw in the wild.
Well, from his brain and from nature's brain. You could say.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, the influence fully, and I think some people have said it recently. Like Dan Robson definitely hasn't got enough credit for what he's done in bonsai, but I believe everybody that I've been fortunate to spend time with in their nurseries, and they let me into their nurseries and work with them or help them in any way I can. I just learn so much from everybody, and that's the thing with the community is we're trying to do out here, make this community better by just exploring the ideas of let's help each other out by expressing more education, and I think with Dan's people he has there, he's going to get better outsourcing of his style because people are on Instagram with his stuff now. People are taking note of who he is just for their posts on what interwebs and everything. I mean, it's hard to put into words because everybody has their own flair, and I don't like to compare. Because it's not to compare, but it's hard to like solidify certain things because for me it's just all about the trees, and it's just different being in those yards because the people's personality speaks to the trees. That's what it comes down to. Like when you go to Dan's yard, Dan's there. You
can recognize one of his trees
100%,
especially a recently styled one.
Like same for Ryan, same for Michael, all these people that we know about, and then the up and comers that are coming around, like Julian Sai, he's got some good stuff coming on. Other people, Kaya Moody in Japan, Seth Nelson, he's doing Aichien, I think. He's got some good stuff going on too, You got Dave Cutchins in Florida. He's got his nursery down there. He's got some great stuff going on. It's just, like I said, everyone who has trees in their nursery reflects their personality, which is an amazing thing because as us, we're practitioners and we're just trying to find our personalities in our trees. That's what I think.
That's deep.
That
might be true. That's deep.
I really think so, though.
I'll have to think about it.
Because, me being from Oregon, I have that essence of that natural ability to be in a forest. Out here, I'm not from Ohio, but I have this inclination now of what my idea is of the nature in Ohio. Very flat, but hilly, rolling hills.
Yeah.
West Virginia's right next door. Go knock on the door, ask for some sugar. I don't know,
Yeah.
And then, yourself, you have the opposite experience of me. Completely, mirrored, because you grew up here. And then you went and lived almost the exact same amount of time I've lived in Ohio.
Yeah.
And then now you're back, and you have this different perception, which is, like I said, it's our finding our own style in our trees.
Yeah. It all adds.
Yeah, yeah, as I say,
consciously. Maybe both.
Finding the consciousness of style in our trees.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else you can think of, or?
No, I think that's about it.
Yeah, I think it was
probably
a good
ending spot.
Yeah. Today's episode has been recorded, produced, and edited by Kevin Ferris and Ryan Houston. Our music was provided by MIDI Cancer. To find more music from MIDI Cancer, check out their SoundCloud and Bandcamp pages. To find more information on the podcast, please check out our Instagram page, Bonsai Time Podcast, and our website, bonsai-timepodcast.com. To stay in touch with us, Kevin's Instagram is Kevin_Ferris, PNW, and Ryan's website is rai2tree2.com. You can find these links in the description below. Thank you for listening, and bonsai on!